Thank you, guys. They learned that this morning. They'd never heard that before. Just picking it up, and thanks to our choir leaders over there. A lot of songs, a lot of crazy songs today, so we'll throw one more at you. Who remembers the song that fits with the scripture today? When you were in vacation Bible school, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, where the Lord he wanted to. And it keeps going. I don't know how the tune keeps going. But that's a classic song when we were little and we learned about Zacchaeus. Does that get the whole story? Fill me in with the gaps. Other than that song I just mangled, what else happened in the story that Wes read that's important for us today?
Christ calls him down.
Christ calls him down. Yep. That's pretty important. Coming to the house. That's the rest of the song. Yeah. Coming to your house today. I'm going to your house to stay. Yep. What else happens?
Zacchaeus gave half his money to the poor.
And Zacchaeus gives half his money to the poor and 4 times what he stole. I don't know what that means. He's a tax collector. He has funny formulas. I don't know how you guys do it. But he gives a lot of money back. Okay, so, but everyone focuses on Zacchaeus being short. And I don't know why that matters, except maybe that Luke is trying to emasculate this big and powerful chief tax collector. Last week we talked about tax collectors. This is the chief tax collector. Jericho, the town they're in, is actually kind of the county seat for where they collect money. So this guy he's the big wig. So Luke, constantly through this book, he's been kind of taking pop shots at rich people. He says, sell what you have and give it to the poor. He says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. And so Luke's Jesus is really just preoccupied with money. And so maybe he points out that this little guy is running and climbing a tree just to embarrass a dignified businessman. It's possible. As a kid, I had this image, and it was from the Sunday school pictures and those little felt boards. Did anyone have those little felt boards in your room? You slap it. Where'd they go? I don't know. They were awesome. You could put things anywhere. And my Zacchaeus, in my memory from that, wore fancy clothes, and he wore purple clothes, and he was wealthy, and he was little, but he stuck out. Like Zacchaeus really stuck out. And I had the little tree, and you would put it on there, and it was kind of like you draw, and there'd be a branch here and a branch there and a few little leaves out here, and you would put your felt Zacchaeus kind of right there on that tree, and then you'd have your dignified Jesus walking by. Well, now I tend to know a thing or two more about trees than I used to. In graduate school, University of Arkansas, there's this big building called Old Main. All old Southern schools have an Old Main, and it's huge and massive stones, and it had these massive pine trees. I've never seen a redwood up in person, but I can't even understand how pine trees can get bigger than this. This was like 70 or 80 feet of just fat pine tree, and whenever I wanted to read a really deep book, I'd climb the pine tree. Immanuel Kant, climb the pine tree, and I'd sit up there. Well, one day I had to talk to the campus police about my climbing of pine trees. So that was cut down a little bit. But that summer, I kept it up. I got a job as a tree trimmer in St. Louis, all around town, especially golf courses in the town. We'd go and cut trees. My resume at the time called it urban naturalist. But really, I was just a tree trimmer. It was just a good way to kind of put it. All day, I was up in there. I was cutting branches. We were feeding him in the chipper. Frank still doesn't believe I know how to use a chainsaw, but I was up in the tree using chainsaws all the time. So, who else has climbed a tree? Who else has climbed a tree in the last, I thought these two. Rosalie's raising her hand. The visitor back there has got it. Yep, he's climbed a tree before. So, I want to get the idea of the kind of tree that Zacchaeus was really climbing. So, where'd you go? Paul, where are you at? Tell us something about a sycamore tree.
Well, sycamore trees are big trees. They're often found in river bottoms, although they're very adaptable. They can handle some very dry conditions too. They have big leaves, beautiful fall color. They get these balls that drop that some people don't like. But the right place, they're a beautiful tree.
Yeah, and so we're imagining they grow kind of like a cottonwood against the water. So this path that Jesus would have been coming through, probably along the water. He's going to Passover, so we're thinking it's springtime. So you're imagining these leaves are really out. Sycamore leaves aren't the deepest green in the world, but they're big. They're like almost as big as my hand, and they're really bushy. The trees are really, really bushy, not like that felt image that we put on there. Right? They have a particular kind of bark that is unlike bark that you're used to around here. It's this off-white it's kind of hard to climb because the low branches will break off, and that bark will slide off on you a little bit like a birch tree, a little bit like an aspen tree, maybe same kind of coloration there. And the branches. Pine branches go this way. Oak branches kind of go in this kind of region right here. Sycamore branches kind of do this. So it's not a normal tree to climb. It's fat around, and it would be hard to climb up that thing. So you're imagining Zacchaeus. This is just my guess. He's run ahead. He's found this tree, the biggest, bushiest tree he can find. And he looks at his linen robe, because he just had linen robes. And he looks at the bark. It's about the same color. And he thinks, I can hide in that tree. It's not easy to climb it, but this is what I think is happening. I get the sense that he wants to see Jesus, but he doesn't want to admit that he's seeing Jesus. He doesn't want other people to see him wanting to see Jesus, and he probably doesn't want himself to admit to himself that he wants to see Jesus. It's possible the tree was just on the road. He jumped up it. It might have been a younger one. The branches were all solid. It was easier to climb than the other palm trees, which really hurt when you try to climb them. The simplest explanation is to say he was just short, and so he climbed up a tree. Simplest explanation is rarely what's going on in the Bible. So I think he's full of questions, and he didn't know how to ask them. I think he's full of guilt and shame about how he made his fortune and how he abused his neighbors, but he doesn't know how to start over. I think he was lonely because it had been so long since anyone in his position had ever had a regular conversation with another regular person. He was just looking for a friend. And maybe at this point in his life, he is searching, he is interested in God, but he's not ready to commit to any of the things that those churches would ask him to do. So he climbs a tree. When I act this out in my mind, that sycamore is this little clue. The issue isn't that he's short, doesn't matter. It's really not that he's even rich. Jesus doesn't push on that very much. It isn't even that he's a jerk. We're all jerks once in a while. The issue with Zacchaeus for Jesus is that he is lost. That's the word he uses, lost. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost. To me, this is very good news for people who are in this building right now, because however we explain it, whatever language we use, many of us in our life have been lost, confused, disengaged, overwhelmed by the world. Some of us are here in church today because right now we feel lost, we feel searching, we feel broken. Some of us wish when we walk through this door that we could have a few leaves covering us so that we could hide and just peek at Jesus as he walks by and doesn't know we're there. Or maybe walking out of these doors for you, for some of you, that's your way of just pushing aside those leaves of doubt, swinging down and starting to look out for Jesus. And for anyone who relates to anything like that, it is good news. It is great news that Jesus is always looking for you. You are found. Whether you're coming out of your tree, whether you've been following Jesus along the road for a long time, if we start with the fact that you are found, the next question is, how do we respond to that? That's the series we've been working on. If you're seeking and Jesus is finding, what's next? The first week we said, be aware of the beauty and the pain around you. The second week we said, come on back. You got questions, you got struggles, that's great. And then come on back to God who welcomes us always. Last week we said, whatever your response is, it's not really just about you. It's about who we are as an interconnected web of people who we affect and who affect us. Now the fourth week, if you are seeking and Jesus is finding, how do we respond? Well, if Jesus is the kind of guy who seeks out and helps the lost, then Jesus' church should be the kind of church that seeks out and helps the lost. That's what we're doing here. That's our job. If we're walking with Jesus, if we are responding to God's grace, it is our job to keep our eyes open for people who are hiding in the trees. Even our stained glass windows have people hiding in green. It's one of the first things you showed me about this church is there's things hiding in our stained glass windows. And I think it fits with this story. But that's our job as a church. Even if you're unsure about God, even if you're not really sold on who Jesus is yourself, you got one foot still kind of in the tree, even if that's you, maybe especially if that's you, God is calling on all of us and on you to seek and to serve other people who need it the most. Now, we are in a town like Nederland, which gets lots of adjectives put on it. Weird, unique. What other adjectives?
Really cool.
Cool, quirky. Quirky, that's the one. What adjective do you have?
Windy.
different. Oh, that's so nice. She just calls it different. We all have other ones. So there's people all over in this town, this very different town, who are in need, and special kinds of needs. And it's not fair to call all of them lost, but there are people all over our mountains who need help. This church helps them in a lot of ways. With food, as Dennis was talking about. People, individuals from this church help out in the community in so many ways. There's always more ways we can help. Lonely teenagers, lonely seniors, maybe the people who are still victimized by the flood. The teenagers next week are going to go help someone out down in Boulder for that. There are people who come through this town all the time seeking something. And far, far too often, we in Nederland treat them with impatience rather than with embracing them. But in so many material, so many personal ways, this church can help heal and be a whole place for people in the community. But there's another sense for people in this town who are in a different kind of need. And again, it's not fair to call everyone lost, but there are so many people in Nederland who are searching spiritually. And the phrase I hear all the time, this is the conversation, I've had it 37 times this week. Oh, you're a pastor. I used to go to church. Now I'm spiritual, but not religious. I don't mind that phrase so much, but it's very common these days. Young people who miss something about their strong youth group, and now they're up here and they don't have a connection. Or parents who are just worn out by all the demands from all different sides, from their older parents to their younger children to their jobs. Everything wears them out. Older folks, they've spent a whole lifetime being disappointed by tradition after tradition and church after church. And so often we hear the response is, I'm spiritual but not religious. And for many of those people, not all, but many of those people, I get the sense that they are peeking through the leaves, searching for something, watching for someone who might walk by. Might not be Jesus that day. They might not want to call it God. They might not even feel all that comfortable with the idea of coming down from the tree. They might feel really comfortable in their tree at that moment. But all over our area, all over down the mountain, everywhere in the world, people are yearning for something. Something deeper, something meaningful, something that resonates with the past and points them to a future. Our town, more than most any town, has people who are attuned spiritually to whatever it means to be spiritual but not religious. And I really do believe our town is full of Zacchaeus-type people, full of people who, for good reason, don't trust religion, full of people who, for good reason, are comfortable with a spirituality that has brought them to a good place, full of people who are open to growth and to depth, and who I believe, or at least I hope this is true, I believe that this town is just full of people who would pay attention if Jesus walked by. But until they see Jesus, they'll probably stay in the tree. And you are the body of Christ. That's what the church is. You are the only Jesus that some people will ever see. And to be clear, again, I'm not talking about everyone in Ned. I'm not just kind of lumping this whole group over here. Some of the Wiccans have been in the news, and there's Buddhists everywhere, and they're meditative atheists, and I have to just tell you, they could teach all of us something about faith. Everyone's got some lesson they could teach, and they're on their own path. I really believe God has found ways to work in everyone's life. I'd love to engage with them a little bit more, but where they're at, great. And I know there are plenty of people in Nederland who love this quote by J.R.R. Tolkien. Not all those who wander are lost, and that's absolutely true. There's a season in life for wandering. I've been a wanderer. The Hebrews were wanderers. And so I'm not just saying if you're a wanderer, you have to come and do this thing we call church. But I have to believe that there are also people all over our town who are wandering and who are lost. And it is our job as the church to invite them from their questions and from their pain and from their suspicion and from their guilt. And it is our job as a church to invite Jesus into their lives. I don't think it's our job as a church to drag people or to convince people or to argue with people. Where big cities, I came from big cities, and Charlotte is this incredibly churchy town, more churches there per capita than just about anywhere in the country. And so many of those churches, they just have this reek of them, of they're just reaching out for the seeker. And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that desperate guy at last call who's trying to get a phone number from a girl. They're pushy, they're too polished, they wear too much cologne, and really it just seems like they want another notch on their pew. That's what it seems like to me when I hear these churches reaching out, just pulling. But look at Jesus. Look what Jesus does in our story. Zacchaeus swings down, and you kind of picture him kind of nervous, and he's looking at his feet, and he doesn't know what to say, and he just so wants to hang out with Jesus, but he says something, and then he wants to take it back, because that's pretty dorky. And then, what does Jesus do? He's just cool. He's just got it under control. He says, come on, Zach, let's go to lunch. Let's get to know each other. Let's talk about what you believe and what you feel and what you want to do with your life. And I'm going to listen because I care. And friends, this is the biggest reason we are here as the church, to care about people, especially people who are lost. We are here to help people seek God, to help people realize that God will always find them. Some of you do that with compassion. Some of you do that with your talents. Some of you do that with your financial contributions. Some of you do that with your energy and your time you put into things here. Some of you are totally bewildered by who Jesus is, and yet still you come here and your presence affects this gathering every Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning. So whatever it looks like for you to be part of a church that helps the lost, let us rest first in the good news that God finds us, and then let us respond in turn by looking out for other people who need to know that. Amen.